I mean, I think a lot of countries in the region are very sensitive about their territorial integrity, even though there's discontent about how the borders were drawn, around 100 years ago during Sykes-Picot. There's still a great reluctance by the powers in Baghdad or Damascus or Ankara to allow any sort of like changing of the power, changing of the borders. So because there's such a strong sense of Kurdish nationalism, I think the governments in the region and in the West as well, they're reluctant to support any sort of like additional hard self-determination for people in the region, and that includes, of course, the Kurdish people. I think certainly the protesters see it that way, yes. What I think is interesting here with the protests is it's kind of an opportunity for new alliances to form internationally about Iraq, but more so within Iraq after the Kurdistan independence referendum, after the military defeat of ISIS, but now we have a resurgent ISIS. It's an opportunity for people to form new alliances. So people in Basra, with their discontent over, scorching hot summer, the lack of electricity, water, economic opportunities, too much corruption, it's an opportunity for people in the north, in the Kurdish regions, and in the disputed territories to kind of have a common ground with people elsewhere in the country. So I do think the protesters in some way see the government as having failed them on the essential services, and I think it extends beyond Basra into the north as well, this discontent among a significant amount of people. I think it's certainly a possibility. I think it's no surprise that ISIS has been more so active in disputed regions in Iraq after their defeat in Mosul and Tal Afar, and losing all their territory. They've been most active in the disputed regions in Kirkuk, in Mosul, north of Mosul, the rest of the Nineveh province, and also, of course, Salah ad-Din, Diyala. But so I think that with the current, I guess you could say, instability in Iraq, there is the possibility that ISIS will always exploit that. And since they're exploiting that now in disputed regions that were, had a transfer of power from KRG rule to federal rule again, which of course was part of an armed conflict, then all of a sudden they're more active in those regions. So there's always the risk in Iraq when you have protests or any kind of instability that ISIS is going to exploit that. And other groups too. I'm not sure. I think ISIS will, they want to do what they want to do. They want, their money, their power, regardless of what happens. Like I said, I think they'll exploit any sort of instability. I think the effects of the Iraqi government response or the actions of the Iraqi government towards the protesters, I think that will have more of an effect, not on ISIS or other groups, but it'll have more of an effect on which direction the protests take. And that's a lesson that we journalists learned from the Arab Spring 7 years ago, where in countries like Tunisia, where the army kind of took a step back, the revolution happened, there wasn't really a civil war. Syria, totally different. The government was forceful, very forceful in the beginning. Different groups started coming in, it turned into a full-fledged civil war. So I think the Iraqi government response, and to a lesser extent the international community response to the protests, that'll more affect what direction the protests take and whether they will get more angry, more intense, or if the government's responding to their demands in a peaceful way with dialogue, it could tamper down more.